Oh well, I'm sure that won't give this nation any more severe political and nationalistic rhetoric, which may fuel a national movement that will result in some of the most brutal acts of a global multinational conflict sometime in the future. Maybe I'm just overthinking things. Oh well, we have a winner! The Russo-Japanese War of 1904 to 1905 was a conflict between the Russian and Japanese empires. But what makes this conflict influential and important? This is the fact that it cemented Japanese influence in Asia and was a warning to the Tsar of Russia that his position wasn't stable. The war itself was a result of Russia expanding its influence into Siberia and advancing into where Vladivostok stands today. Russia was adamant about gaining a warm water port in Asia to bolster its fleet. The Japanese wished to expand their influence onto the Asian mainland, and specifically at this point, Korea. Tensions between Russia and Japan had flared only a few years before when Japan had seized what was then Port Arthur, the Liaodong Peninsula, from China, only to be forced by Germany, Russia, and France to hand it over, and subsequently where Russia received it from China on loan for 10 years. This is known as the Triple Intervention. The war itself kicked off on the 8th of February 1904, when Russia outright rejected the Japanese offer to recognize Russian influence in Manchuria, in exchange for Russia recognizing Japanese influence in Korea. But following Russia's expansionist policies of the era, this was met with stern rejection, and the Russians claimed Northern Korea as a buffer state. So the Japanese attacked Port Arthur, hoping to catch the Russian fleet off guard. They attacked 3 hours before the declaration of war even reached St. Petersburg. Although to prevent being internationally shamed and to avoid foreign intervention, the Japanese used the excuse of the Russian surprise attack on the Swedish during the conflict over Finland. And in the ultimate spawn camper move, the Japanese moved their fleet to point-blank range and blocked off the Russian fleet, and moved torpedo boats to strike the Russian fleet. At the time of the attack, the admiral of the Russian Navy in the Far East, one Oskar Ludwig Stark, was holding a birthday party for his wife on the battleship Petropavlovsk, and to many of the guests' surprises, those torpedoes were in fact not a part of the celebrations, and were rather coming right for them. Surprisingly, the initial attack only damaged 2 ships, but what this did was give more time for the Japanese Navy to begin sealing off the peninsula from the rest of the Russian fleet. And it meant the Russian fleet would have to wait for the repairs before trying to break free. So Stark was sacked and made the poster boy for the defeat. He was soon sent to the Black Sea. His replacement was a competent and direct naval commander, Stepan Makarov. No relation. Makarov had been the first admiral in history to deploy a torpedo against an enemy ship in combat, and he had distinguished himself during the Russo-Turkish War of 1877 to 1878. Unfortunately, he was the one man who could have defeated or at least halted the Japanese. But all was not on the side of the Tsar, as the flagship Petropavlovsk was hit by a mine and sank, killing Makarov and most of the crew. Soon the Russian fleet attempted to break out of Port Arthur. However, they were met by Togo's main fleet and were destroyed. Very few ships managed to make it out, and as a result, the Russians would soon have to reinforce what was left of the Russian Far East fleet with the Baltic fleet. At this point, the leader of the Russian Navy, Russo-Japanese, was probably losing his mind, and had probably considered moving to Hokkaido and changing his name to Tokugawa to become a Buddhist monk. With all things going really well for the Navy, the Russian army wasn't having much of a better time. Because the Navy was blocked in at Port Arthur, they couldn't stop the Japanese landing troops in Korea. So okay, things aren't going bad for the army, it's going horrific. And it got so much worse, because the army was unable to stop the Japanese at the Yalu River, and soon, by July 1904, the Japanese were shelling Port Arthur and the Navy. And a little time later, over 600,000 soldiers met at Mukden, and the battle again cemented for the Japanese only the new plan of the Russian fleet was at least a little bit of a threat. So now Russo-Japanese took parts of the Baltic fleet and was to sail them eastward. However, they mistook English fishing ships off the coast of Denmark for Japanese torpedo boats. So when they sailed round to Spain, they offloaded several sailors who were accused of provoking the firefight. The ships departed. However, one of the Russian cruisers disappeared for a bit, but when they regrouped around Trafalgar, they reported to have chased off several Japanese boats. which turned out to be 2 Swedish fishing trawlers and a German cargo ship, which they had also reported being fired upon by a Russian cruiser. They really didn't want to win this one, did they? So Britain was now calling for war, but the French were quite done with the stupidity of their allies and agree that the Russians are not allowed to use the Suez Canal, so they have to sail around the Cape. By the time they get there, not only are the crew and ships tired and unable to fight to their maximum capacity, but tactical blunders, including using the most obvious crossing, the Strait of Tsushima, where they were to meet Togo's fleet, and subsequently defeated with now 70% of Russia's admiralty dead and wounded, and many others incapacitated. So the war was called off by Russia, because of the entire western side of the empire rising in revolt. So now they had to crush a revolt, so it didn't escalate into civil war. This war saw Japan become a global empire, and also a major power on the global stage. It saw the decline of the Russian Empire, and the weakness of the empire, which would later be exploited by the Central Powers in World War I. Although Russia and Japan would harbour tensions for many years to come, the war now saw Japan center its attention on China. Interestingly, Sakhalin, one of the islands during the Treaty of Portsmouth, was divided in two, and would still remain hotly disputed between Russia and Japan till this day. Thank you for watching, don't forget to subscribe, and as always, may the winds be in your sails.